Hi class, my name is Elle Heath, and I'd like to inform you that you could have some unwanted guests showing up to your Thanksgiving Day dinner. No, I'm not talking about your crazy second cousin or your in-laws. I'm talking about something that you could be putting at your dining room table without even knowing it. According to USA Today, 75% of all foods purchased from supermarkets contain some type of genetically modified organisms or genetically modified ingredients, without us even knowing it. What does it mean to be genetically modified? Well, today I hope to inform you about the advances in agriculture and genetic engineering that have changed the way we eat and live forever. More so, I plan to share with you the advantages and disadvantages of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, and how they relate to us as consumers and our environment. Lastly, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the controversy surrounding GMOs so you can better make an educated decision on whether you think that they're helpful or that they're harmful. First, I think it's important to discuss what is meant by a genetically modified organism. According to the Non-GMO Project, genetically modified organisms are any living organisms whose genetic makeup or material has been artificially manipulated in a laboratory through genetic engineering. Through the use of genetic engineering, combinations of plants, animals, bacteria, and viruses are created that aren't traditional in nature and aren't done through crossbreeding. This might sound a bit far-fetched, right? But it's not really that uncommon. Or it's doesn't really sound all that bad. Think about having an apple that doesn't turn brown after minutes, or think about a tomato that can be grown any season. It's not as what many people think of as a frankenfood, like the grapple, the grape apple that you see at the store, or things like that. It's actually in almost a lot of the food that we eat today. Chances are, if you've eaten something, you've probably eaten something that has been genetically altered. So why are they needed? Farmers have been able to grow food for years. Why all of a sudden are they needing GMOs? Well, according to Purdue, farmers worry about three things when growing crops: insects, weeds, and weather. Use of genetic engineering has allowed farmers to alleviate problems posed by insects or weeds by using genetic manipulation to allow certain crops to be resistant to particular insects and weeds. You may be wondering if GMOs are in all the food that we're eating. So I think it's important to discuss where they can be found. According to Life Science, 90% of all soy, corn, canola, and sugar beets contain genetically modified ingredients. And more than that, the USA is one of the biggest producers of genetically modified organisms. Next, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about why we should care. What does it mean to us? Well, many say that we should care strictly because we should care about what we're putting into our bodies. We have a right to transparency in knowing about the food that we're eating. Some also say that it's important to know because the effect that it could be having on our environment. To help you understand if GMOs are helpful or harmful, I'd first like to discuss some of the advantages of GMOs and how they relate to our environment. First and foremost, one of the biggest advantages to our environment for GMOs is the productivity that they allow. Farmers are able to produce more now than ever. Oklahoma State University reports the increase of genetically modified crops has allowed them to do more in less time, using less tools and chemicals, and has helped the reduction of greenhouse gas, soil erosion, and pollution. Likewise, it's allowed us to keep our land near these farms more sustainable, healthier, and more natural. Another advantage of GMOs within the environment is that it's allowed us to genetically engineer to resist certain pests or weeds. This can be helpful to the environment as a whole because farmers are using less toxins, which can spread to other crops and to possibly consumers. Lastly, one of the ways that GMOs benefit our environment is through sustainability, meaning that now we're able to use land that we weren't able to use previously because we can genetically alter the DNA in these plants so they can survive in environments in which they weren't able to before. So land that we potentially thought was useless, we now can use to grow certain types of fruits or vegetables or crops if we make their genetic makeup able to survive in that type of environment. Now that we've talked about how GMOs are advantageous for our environment, let's talk about how that they can be a benefit to us as consumers. The first would be in the reduction of food pricing. According to Forbes, Our food prices have fallen drastically within the last 50 years, and this isn't just by chance. This is because of the use of genetically modified organisms, because producers are able to produce more so they can sell it for less because they're not having to worry about those three things that we talked about earlier, the insects, the weeds, and the weather. More interestingly, New York Times reported about how GMOs have generated more productivity for farmers and allowing consumers to have more. 122 million tons of soybeans, 337 million tons of corn, 18 million tons of cotton, 6.6 tons of canola between 1996 and 2012, which makes consumers have access to more food, especially in third world countries where that wasn't possible before. Another benefit of GMOs to consumers is that we're able to genetically alter food so that it's more nutritional. I don't know about you, but sometimes I have trouble making sure that I intake my recommended daily allowance of certain minerals and vitamins. Use of genetic manipulation will allow us to make sure that we are getting those recommended values because we can alter the genetic makeup of particular products or things. Finally, one of the last advantages that I'd like to talk to you today in regard to the GMO is that the American Association for Advancement of Science says that they're no riskier than eating something that's certified organic. So they say that they are exactly the same and that they pose no risk to us, which I know is a major concern for a lot of consumers. Now that we've discussed the many advantages of GMOs, let's talk about some of the disadvantages. First, I'd like to talk about the disadvantages in relation to our environment. The Center for Food Safety goes as far as strongly stating that the genetic engineering of plants and animals is potentially one of the greatest and most intractable environmental challenges of the 21st century, because what we've done we cannot take back. And what have we done? We don't really know because we're unable to say how it will affect us in the future. A lot of people say that it will have a negative effect because of our ecosystem and the biodiversity, that it's lowering our ability to have a vast, diverse ecosystem. So because when a pest or an insect that we're genetically modifying plants to be able to no longer fall victim to, when we do that, they're becoming extinct. And we're not being able to understand the repercussions of that because now that they're extinct, there's a hierarchy of the food chain, and it's possibly making another animal become extinct as well. Another downside of our GMOs to our environment is the lack of knowledge of how it will affect us in the future and the residual effects. So the pests that we now are saying that the plants are no longer falling victim to, we don't know how that will change everything in the future. Now that we discussed some of the negative effects of the GMOs, let's talk about how GMOs can be harmful or have negative benefits to consumption. First, and probably the scariest to me personally, is the lack of research surrounding the topic. GMOs are still pretty new, so there aren't any long-term credible studies that have been done to show how they affect the human body. World-renowned biologist Bhargava reviewed more than 600 scientific journals and concluded that genetic modified organisms are a major contributor to the deteriorating health in Americans. And why Americans, do you ask? It's because America is one of the few countries that actually allow use of GMOs. Another red flag for consumers in regards to GMO would be the possibility of chemical contamination. So when plants are engineered to contain bacteria in every drop of their DNA, so instead of spraying it on them like the pesticides that we used to, now they have this within their actual genetic makeup. So we can't wash that off because it's in them. So humans are actually eating this, and it's causing potential cancer to individuals. Another threat that consumers face due to GMOs is, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the resistance to antibiotics is increasing, infecting more than 2 million people each year and ultimately killing 23,000. Through the use of genetic manipulation, more people are noticing that they're resistant to antibiotics than they used to be. So now that we've covered the advantages and disadvantages of GMO, it's easy to see why that there's controversy surrounding the topic. One area of contention was one that I talked about in both the advantages and disadvantages, and that's its safety. We have advocates saying and arguing that use of GMOs and consumption of GMOs is helpful, that it's not harmful, that it's not riskier to consume versus regular food. We have some that say that it has no effect on the environment, and some that say that it has all the effect on the environment in an awful way. So it's hard to really know without long-term studies if GMOs are good or bad. The New York Times also reports that it's human nature to resist change and fear the unknown. So the fact that this contention is something that causes controversy is probably pretty normal. Some may consider GMO foods, like I said, to be the frankenfoods, but it's more alarming to most that they're not able to determine or distinguish which foods have GMOs because the lack of honest food labeling. Which brings us to our last point. The lack of honest labeling of genetically modified organisms can cause a lot of controversy because 93% of Americans believe that they should be labeled, according to ABC News, whereas we're not doing that. And why aren't we doing that? A lot of people have a huge issue with that. So to review today, we've discussed GMOs, what they are, where they could be found, and why they're used. We talked about their advantages in regards to the environment and consumption, and we talked about potential disadvantages of their consumption and how they affect our environment. Lastly, we covered some of the controversies surrounding GMOs and how we can take these arguments to determine if we think that they're helpful or they're harmful. I hope that I've been able to provide you with adequate information on GMOs, so that way if you decide to continue to have them at your dinner, you know what you're bringing to the table, or if you decide that you don't want them at your table anymore, the reasons why. If you have any questions, let me know.